how difficult was it to give it up to an editor? And you said you had to have thick skin. I mean, editors, that's what they do, is change things.
Sure. It was difficult to give. I mean, it was difficult to mail it finally, and because it was almost, like turning your child into the world, and you want to make sure that they're dressed right and that everyone says, "Oh, how cute," kind of thing. So that it was. I mean, that part of it was a little. It was daunting. Except that my editor said that she would never insist that I change anything. That she would suggest, and she would suggest strongly, about some things, but ultimately it was my book, and ultimately the final decision. I mean, other than style things that are not, non-negotiable, that ultimately it was my decision. And so that was, when I first met with her, before we signed or before they even made an offer, she just talks about how she worked as an editor, and so I was comfortable with that she wouldn't, like, say, set it in the 1960s or something like that. So that made it was easier then to let it go. She did want more particularization that I think actually helped the story. As particularized as it was, she wanted even more, and she was like, just push that throughout. Give us Philadelphia, give us this neighborhood, give us this time period, give us these people, just however you can describe them. And so I worked, once I, went to revising, that was one of the things I put a lot of time into, just particularizing, knowing like where Father Divine's was and how much a refrigerator cost, and how do people dress, so that I did a lot of that. And then there was a plot point at the very end where one of the characters sees into the future, and she actually saw her, as it were, sister. She saw her, in a coffin, and my editor said that she didn't think that worked for the story. That she didn't think that the reader wants to see this character, or even have the idea that this character dies. And why did I do that? And I said, well, I think that that's how it should be. And I was standing my ground, and she said again, she didn't like that. And so every time we talked, she would mention that particular, just a few sentences. And I decided I wasn't going to change it. And then again, and this was when it was already in galley form, and they hate you to change anything when it's in galley form. That is just like a misplaced semicolon or that kind of thing. To actually rewrite an entire page is like, pretty major in galley form. And sometimes they'll actually charge you for it, for resetting the type. Even though now everything is done so differently, I don't even know that that's as much an issue. But she said that it was still, she was reacting viscerally to it. And so I changed it. And a lot of people who saw it, a lot of reviewers who saw it in galley, the first thing that they said as they asked questions about it, why did you make Liz die? And I said, oh, that's not in the final. That's just in the galley. And so in that case, she was in fact right about that. And never saying you have to change this, but just constantly bringing it up, and how it was affecting her, and how she thought it might affect the reader, and how she thought it was in fact damaging to the story. So there was no like, you got to totally redo this book. You got to X out this character, do this, do that. None of that. Just things that weren't, she thought could have been presented in a better way. Things that weren't perhaps justified in the way that they could be, so that it made sense, or so that it didn't feel contrived. I mean, like those kinds of things. Those kinds of changes she asked for and suggested. But beyond that, no, like, taking a hatchet to the book. Not at all.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yes.
That was not as painful as what you may have heard.
Absolutely.